The county courthouse was busy that Monday morning. People walked back and forth through the wide hallways. Some looked worried, some looked bored, some looked angry. The building was old, but well kept. The floors were shiny marble that echoed with every step. Large windows let in streams of light that made dust particles dance in the air. John Miller sat quietly in his wheelchair near the back of courtroom 3. He was early for his hearing. He always made sure to be early for everything. That was something the Marines had taught him. His hands rested on the wheels of his chair. They were strong hands, with calluses and scars that told stories of his 15 years of service. John was 43 years old, but the lines on his face made him look older. His short brown hair was starting to gray at the temples. He wore a simple dark blue suit that he had bought specially for court. It was a bit uncomfortable across his broad shoulders, but he wanted to look respectful. John hadn't expected to end up in court over a traffic ticket. It had started as a simple mistake at a busy intersection 3 months ago. He hadn't seen the yield sign because a delivery truck was blocking it. When Officer Donovan pulled him over, John had tried to explain. But something about the officer's tone had made John's temper flare. Words were exchanged. Nothing too bad, but enough to turn a simple ticket into a court appearance for disrespecting an officer and creating a public disturbance. The courtroom was filling up now. Most of the wooden benches were taken by people waiting for their own cases. The air smelled of floor polish and nervous sweat. John's lawyer, Sam Brooks, pushed through the swinging gate that separated the audience from the court area. Sam was younger than John by at least 10 years. He had kind eyes and spoke in a calm, steady voice that made John feel a little less nervous. "Morning, John," Sam said, putting his worn leather briefcase on the table in front of them. "How are you holding up?" "I'm okay," John replied. "Just want to get this over with." Sam nodded and started taking papers out of his briefcase. "Judge Adams is presiding today," he said quietly. John noticed how Sam's shoulders tensed a little when he mentioned the judge's name. "Is that bad?" he asked. Sam forced a smile. "Let's just say she runs a tight ship. Very traditional, very by the book." Before John could ask more questions, a side door opened. A court officer stepped out. "All rise," the officer called out. "The Honorable Judge Patricia Adams presiding." Everyone in the courtroom stood up. Everyone except John, of course. He straightened his back as much as he could in his wheelchair. He wanted to show respect even if he couldn't stand. Judge Adams walked into the courtroom with quick, sure steps. She was in her early 60s with steel gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her black robe seemed to make her even more serious and important. She sat down at the large wooden bench and put on her reading glasses. "Be seated," she said without looking up from the papers in front of her. The room filled with the sounds of people sitting back down on the wooden benches. Judge Adams began going through the cases for the day. Her voice was clear and strong. She didn't smile. She didn't make jokes. She just worked through each case quickly and efficiently. John watched as she handled the cases before his. A young man who had been caught shoplifting got community service. A woman who had been driving with an expired license got a fine. Judge Adams was fair but firm with everyone. As he waited, John thought about the day that had changed his life forever. It had been hot in Afghanistan, so hot that the air seemed to wave like water above the dusty road. John had been leading his unit on a routine patrol in Helmand Province. They had done this route many times before. They knew the dangers. They were careful. But that day, the IED had been new. Hidden well. They had no chance to avoid it. The explosion had flipped their vehicle. John remembered the sound more than anything else. A boom so loud it felt like it broke something inside his ears. Then came the pain and the screams of his men. John had tried to help them. He had crawled through the burning wreckage, pulling out those he could reach. But he couldn't feel his legs. He didn't realize until later that his spine had been damaged, that he would never walk again. 3 of his men had died that day. Good men. Young men with families waiting for them back home. John had lived, but part of him had died there in the dust and heat with his brothers. Case number 47, the clerk called out, pulling John back to the present. State versus John Miller. Charges: failure to yield at a traffic signal, disrespecting an officer, and creating a public disturbance. Sam touched John's shoulder gently. That's us, he said. He pushed John's wheelchair forward until they were in front of the judge's bench. Officer Donovan was already there, standing straight, in his crisp uniform. He looked confident, sure of himself. Counselor, Judge Adams said, looking at Sam over her glasses, how does your client plead? Not guilty to all charges, Your Honor, Sam replied. Judge Adams made a note on her paper. Officer Donovan, please, state your account of the events. Officer Donovan stepped forward. He was tall and fit, probably in his 30s. His voice was loud enough to fill the courtroom without seeming like he was shouting. Your Honor, on March 12th at approximately 2:30 p.m., I observed the defendant fail to yield at the intersection of Maple and 4th Street. When I pulled him over to issue a citation, he became argumentative and raised his voice. His exact words were, "Don't you have anything better to do than harass people over stupid signs?" Several pedestrians stopped to watch the interaction, creating a disturbance. Judge Adams looked at John with stern eyes. Mr. Miller, do you have anything to add? John opened his mouth to speak, but Sam quickly stepped in. Your Honor, my client admits he failed to yield, but only because the sign was blocked by a delivery truck. As for the exchange with Officer Donovan, my client feels his words were taken out of context. The judge's eyes narrowed slightly. I'd like to hear from Mr. Miller directly. John felt his heart beat faster. The courtroom seemed to get smaller and the air felt thicker. He could feel everyone looking at him. Yes, Your Honor, he said, his voice steady despite his nerves. I didn't see the yield sign because it was blocked. When the officer pulled me over, I was having a bad day. My pain levels were high. I didn't speak to him the way I should have, and I regret that, but I never shouted or caused a scene. Judge Adams looked at him for a long moment. Her face gave away nothing of what she was thinking. The room was so quiet, John could hear the clock on the wall ticking. I see, she finally said. She looked at some papers in front of her, then back at John. Her eyes moved briefly to his wheelchair, then back to his face. This court takes traffic violations seriously, Mr. Miller. They may seem minor, but they ensure the safety of all citizens. John nodded. I understand, Your Honor. The courtroom was filled with a tense silence. Everyone seemed to be holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The morning sunlight came through the high windows, casting long rectangles of light on the polished floor. John could hear the soft whirring of the air conditioning system and the occasional cough or rustle of clothing from the people sitting behind him. Judge Adams studied the papers in front of her one more time. Then she looked up, her face serious and composed. We will proceed to sentencing, she announced. Her voice echoed slightly in the quiet room. Sam shifted beside John. He looked surprised. Your Honor, he began, we were expecting to present our case more fully, with witness testimony about the blocked sign, and I've reviewed the officer's dashcam footage and your submitted statements, Judge Adams interrupted. I find the evidence sufficient to proceed directly to sentencing. John felt his stomach tighten. This wasn't going as Sam had prepared him for. He glanced at his lawyer, who gave him a small, reassuring nod, though worry showed in his eyes. The judge adjusted her glasses and looked directly at John. The next words she spoke would change everything in that courtroom. Mr. Miller, Judge Adams said firmly, please rise for sentencing. The words hung in the air like a heavy cloud. Mr. Miller, please rise for sentencing. Judge Adams stared down at John from her high bench, waiting. The wooden gavel rested near her right hand, ready to be used if needed. John felt his face grow hot. He looked up at the judge, then down at his unmoving legs. Everyone in the courtroom was watching him now. He could feel their eyes. Some people looked confused, others looked uncomfortable. A few even leaned forward to see what would happen next. Sam Brooks, John's lawyer, quickly stood up beside John's wheelchair. Sam was a good lawyer. He had helped many veterans before. He was tall and thin, with kind brown eyes and a voice that stayed calm even when things got difficult. "Your Honor," Sam began, his voice respectful but firm. "My client is physically unable to stand. Judge Adams held up her hand to stop Sam from talking. Her face showed no emotion. Her eyes moved from Sam to John, then back to Sam again. "I said stand, Mr. Miller," she repeated. Her voice was louder this time. "It is customary in this court for defendants to stand when being sentenced. I expect all defendants to follow this rule." The room got even quieter. The court reporter's fingers hovered over her machine. She wasn't sure if she should type what was happening. Officer Pete Collins, who stood by the door in his blue uniform, shifted, his weight from one foot to the other. He looked at the floor, not wanting to watch what was happening. John gripped the arms of his wheelchair tightly. His knuckles turned white from squeezing so hard. He had faced many difficult moments since his injury. People who stared too long. Buildings without ramps. Bathrooms he couldn't use. But this was different. This was happening in front of a room full of strangers, in a place where he was already in trouble. "I can't stand, Your Honor," John said quietly. His voice was steady even though his heart was racing. "I lost the use of my legs in Afghanistan. I'm sorry." Judge Adams didn't respond right away. She looked at John as if she was trying to decide if he was telling the truth. The silence stretched on for what felt like minutes but was probably only seconds. Sam placed his hand on John's shoulder. It was a small gesture of support, but John was grateful for it. This wasn't how either of them had expected the hearing to go. From the back of the courtroom, someone coughed. The sound seemed very loud in the silence. A woman sitting near the front row whispered something to the man beside her. Her voice was too quiet to hear what she said, but her face showed she was upset by what was happening. Officer Donovan, who had given John the ticket, was still standing near the front of the room. He looked uncomfortable now. His eyes moved between John and the judge. Maybe he was starting to regret making such a big deal about the traffic violation. Judge Adams finally spoke again. "Mr. Miller," she said, her voice still stern. "In my courtroom, we follow proper procedures. All defendants must show proper respect for this court." Sam stepped forward again. His calm was starting to crack a little. John could hear the tension in his voice when he spoke. "Your Honor, with all due respect," Sam said, "my client is showing proper respect. John Miller served our country for 15 years as a Marine. He lost the use of his legs when an IED exploded under his vehicle in Helmand Province. 3 of his fellow Marines died in that attack. John pulled 2 others to safety before realizing he could no longer feel his legs." Some people in the courtroom gasped softly when they heard this. An older man in the back row who wore a Vietnam veteran cap shook his head sadly. "John has been decorated for bravery," Sam continued. "He earned a Purple Heart and a Bronze Star. He has shown more respect for this country than most of us ever will. The fact that he cannot physically stand is not a sign of disrespect. It's a sign of his sacrifice." John felt uncomfortable as Sam listed his medals and actions. He had never liked talking about that day or what happened after. In his mind, he had just done what any Marine would do for their brothers. The real heroes were the ones who didn't come home. Judge Adams' expression changed slightly. Something flickered in her eyes. Maybe surprise, maybe doubt. She looked down at the papers in front of her again, as if searching for something she had missed. "Is this information in the file?" she asked, her voice a little less hard than before. "Yes, Your Honor," Sam replied. "It's in the background information we submitted last week, page 3 of our filing." Judge Adams flipped through the papers. John watched her face as she read. He had seen that look before. It was the look people got when they realized they had made a mistake but weren't sure how to fix it. The courtroom remained silent as the judge read. John could hear the tick of the large clock on the wall. Tick, tick, tick. Each second seemed to stretch out longer than normal. John thought about all the times he had stood at attention as a Marine, back straight, chin up, eyes forward. He had been proud to stand that way, proud to wear the uniform, proud to serve. Now he would give anything to be able to stand again, even for just a moment, not because the judge demanded it, but because it was something he had once taken for granted. Finally, Judge Adams looked up from the papers. Her face was different now. The sternness was still there, but something else had joined it, something that looked almost like shame. "Mr. Brooks," she said to Sam, "this information should have been brought to my attention earlier." "It was in our filing, Your Honor," Sam repeated gently. Judge Adams pressed her lips together. She looked at John again, seeing him properly for the first time. Not just as another defendant, but as a wounded veteran, a man who had given part of himself for his country. "Mr. Miller," she said, her voice a little softer now, "I apologize for not reviewing your file more thoroughly before this hearing." John nodded but didn't speak. He wasn't sure what to say. An apology from a judge was rare, but it didn't erase the humiliation he had felt moments before. Officer Donovan stepped forward suddenly. "Your Honor," he said, "may I speak?" Judge Adams looked surprised by the interruption, but she nodded. "Briefly, officer. I wasn't aware of Mr. Miller's background when I issued the citation," Officer Donovan said. "If I had known he was a wounded veteran, I might have handled the situation differently. I have a brother in the Army. I respect our military personnel." John wasn't sure how to feel about this. On one hand, he didn't want special treatment just because he was a veteran. On the other hand, a little understanding would have been nice. That day at the traffic stop, the judge considered Officer Donovan's words, then turned her attention back to John. "Mr. Miller, regardless of this misunderstanding, we still need to address the charges against you." Sam nodded and placed his hand on John's shoulder again. "We understand, Your Honor." Judge Adams seemed to be thinking carefully about what to do next. The courtroom remained silent, everyone waiting for her decision. The morning sun had moved, and now the light coming through the windows fell directly on John. He could feel its warmth on his face. "Before I proceed," Judge Adams said, her voice now controlled but less harsh, "I would like to ask everyone except Mr. Miller and his counsel to leave the courtroom. We will take a 15-minute recess." This was unusual. People looked at each other in confusion. The court officer near the door stood straighter, surprised by the judge's request. "All rise," the court officer called out as Judge Adams stood up. Everyone stood except John. This time, no one expected him to. As Judge Adams walked toward the door behind the bench, she paused and looked back at John. Their eyes met briefly. Something passed between them. A moment of understanding, perhaps, or maybe the beginning of one. The judge disappeared through the door. People began filing out of the courtroom, some looking back at John with curious expressions. "What's happening?" John asked Sam quietly when most people had left. Sam shook his head. "I'm not sure. This isn't standard procedure, but maybe that's a good thing." Officer Collins, the court officer, remained by the door. He was the only other person left in the room besides John and Sam. "Do you need anything, sir?" Officer Collins asked John. His tone was respectful. The "sir" wasn't just a formality now. It was a recognition. "No, thank you," John replied. "I'm fine." But he wasn't fine. His heart was still beating too fast. His hands were still gripping the arms of his wheelchair, and his mind was racing, wondering what would happen when Judge Adams returned. The 15 minutes passed slowly. John sat quietly in his wheelchair, looking around the nearly empty courtroom. Only he, Sam, and Officer Collins remained. The large clock on the wall ticked loudly in the silence. John's thoughts were a mess of worry, confusion, and a bit of anger. He had come to court expecting to pay a fine, maybe get some community service. He hadn't expected to be humiliated. Sam busied himself by organizing papers in his briefcase. Every few minutes he would look at his watch, then at the door where Judge Adams had disappeared. Officer Collins stood by the main door, his face showing no emotion. The room felt too big now that it was empty. "Do you think she's checking my military records?" John asked Sam quietly. Sam closed his briefcase and sat down next to John. Maybe. Or she might be collecting her thoughts. This situation is unusual. John nodded and looked down at his hands. They were strong hands, shaped by years of military service and then years of pushing his wheelchair. He had learned to live with his disability. Most days he didn't think about what he couldn't do. He focused on what he could do. But moments like this, when someone pointed out his difference, were still hard. Finally, the door behind the judge's bench opened. Judge Adams walked back into the courtroom. She wasn't wearing her black robe anymore. Instead, she wore a navy blue suit with a simple white blouse. Without her robe, she looked smaller, more human. Her face was different too. The stern look was gone. "Please note that we are still in session, though informal," she said to the court reporter who had returned to her seat. Then she did something that surprised everyone. Instead of climbing the steps back to her bench, she walked around to the front. She pulled out a chair and sat down directly across from John, at the same level. Sam straightened in his seat, clearly surprised by this break from normal court procedure. Officer Collins also looked confused but remained at his post by the door. "Mr. Miller," Judge Adams began, her voice softer than before. "I want to apologize to you properly." John hadn't expected this. Judges didn't usually apologize to defendants, especially not like this. "During the recess, I reviewed your full file," she continued. "I also made a phone call to verify your service record." She paused, collecting her thoughts. "What happened earlier was unacceptable. I should have reviewed your file completely before the hearing. My failure to do so led to an embarrassing and disrespectful situation." John didn't know what to say. He looked at Sam, who gave him a small nod of encouragement. "Thank you, Your Honor," John said simply. Judge Adams shook her head slightly. "No need to call me Your Honor right now. We're speaking person to person." She paused again, then added, "You can call me Patricia." This was even more surprising. Sam shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable with this break from court protocol, but he didn't interrupt. "Okay. Patricia," John said, the name feeling strange on his tongue. "I appreciate the apology." Judge Adams, Patricia, looked at John directly now. Her eyes were gray-blue and surprisingly kind without the stern expression she usually wore. "I need to explain something to you, Mr. Miller." "John," he offered. "If I'm calling you Patricia, you should call me John." She nodded. "John, I need to explain why I reacted the way I did." She took a deep breath. "My son Kevin was a Marine too." John noticed how she said was, not is. He felt a heaviness in his chest, sensing what might come next. Kevin enlisted right after high school. He was so proud to be a Marine. He was sent to Iraq during Operation Desert Storm. Her voice became a little less steady. He was killed when his unit came under fire. He was only 19. "I'm sorry," John said softly. He knew those words never really helped, but they were all anyone had. Patricia nodded. "Thank you. It was a long time ago. 28 years. But some days it feels like yesterday." She looked down at her hands, then back up at John. "I keep his picture on my bench, right next to where I sign court orders. It helps me remember that every decision I make affects real people." John understood now. "But today you forgot." Patricia didn't try to deny it. "Yes, I got caught up in the procedures, the rules. I saw another defendant, not a person." She looked ashamed. "Certainly not a Marine who had sacrificed for his country. Just like my Kevin." The room was quiet for a moment. Even the court reporter had stopped typing, caught up in the personal moment. "Can I ask you something?" Patricia said after a while. John nodded. "What happened?" "In Afghanistan. You don't have to tell me if you don't want to." John rarely talked about that day, but something about Patricia's openness made him willing to share. "We were on patrol in Helmand Province. It was my third tour." John's voice was steady but quiet. "Our vehicle hit an IED, an explosive device, buried in the road. The blast flipped our Humvee. 3 of my men died instantly. Patricia listened without interrupting, her eyes never leaving John's face. I was in the front passenger seat. Somehow I stayed conscious after the blast. I could smell fuel leaking and knew the vehicle might catch fire. 2 of my men were still alive but trapped in the back. I managed to pull them out before I realized I couldn't feel my legs. John paused, remembering the heat, the dust, the smell of burning metal and worse things. A medical evacuation got us out about 20 minutes later. By then I knew something was seriously wrong with my spine. The doctors later told me I would never walk again. Patricia wiped a tear from her cheek. She didn't try to hide it. And the men you saved? Both survived. One lost his left arm, the other had serious burns, but he recovered. He's a high school teacher now in Ohio. We still talk sometimes. Sam had been quiet during this exchange, respectfully letting John tell his story. But now he gently reminded them of the situation. Judge Adams, Patricia, what happens now with John's case? Patricia seemed to return to the present moment. She straightened in her chair and looked at John with new eyes. Officer Collins, she called to the court officer still standing by the door. Yes, Judge, he replied. Please ask Officer Donovan to return to the courtroom. Officer Collins nodded and stepped out. A minute later, he returned with Officer Donovan, who looked confused to find the judge sitting at the table instead of at her bench. Officer Donovan, Patricia said, I've been reviewing this case more carefully. You wrote in your report that Mr. Miller became argumentative when you stopped him for failing to yield. Can you be more specific about what happened? Officer Donovan looked uncomfortable. He glanced at John, then back at the judge. He questioned why I was giving him a ticket. He said the sign was blocked and that I should be catching real criminals instead of harassing him. Was he shouting? Patricia asked. Not exactly shouting, no. Did he threaten you in any way? No, ma'am. And the public disturbance mentioned in your report, how many people actually stopped to watch? Officer Donovan shifted his weight. Maybe 2 or 3 pedestrians paused for a moment. Patricia nodded. Thank you for your honesty, officer. She turned to John. Mr. Miller, do you regret how you spoke to Officer Donovan that day? John nodded. Yes, I was having a bad day. My back was hurting worse than usual. But that's no excuse. I shouldn't have spoken to him that way. Patricia looked at all 3 men, John, Sam, and Officer Donovan. Then she made a decision. Here's what's going to happen, she said. We're going to go back on the record in a few minutes. The formal charges of disrespecting an officer and creating a public disturbance will be dismissed. For the failure to yield, since you admit the sign was blocked but you still had a responsibility to approach the intersection with caution, I'm going to issue a reduced fine of $50 with no points on your license. Officer Donovan looked like he wanted to object but thought better of it. Thank you, Your Honor, Sam said, slipping back into formal address as they prepared to return to official court business. There's one more thing, Patricia said, looking directly at John. Would you be willing to come back to this courthouse next week for something completely different than this case? John looked confused. What for? Patricia's eyes had a new light in them now. I have an idea. Something that might help other veterans who find themselves in our court system. Something that my son Kevin would have been proud of. And I think you could help make it happen. 1 week later, John wheeled himself into the county courthouse again. This time he felt different. Not nervous or angry like before, just curious. Judge Adams, Patricia, had asked him to come back, but she hadn't explained exactly why. She had only said it had something to do with veterans and the court system. The courthouse was quieter today. It was Friday afternoon, and most of the day's cases were already finished. John checked in with the security guard at the front desk. The guard, an older man with gray hair and kind eyes, recognized him from the week before. Good to see you again, Mr. Miller, the guard said. Judge Adams is expecting you. You can go right up to her chambers. 2nd floor, end of the hall on the right. John thanked him and made his way to the elevator. He had never been to a judge's private office before. In the elevator, he straightened his tie. He was wearing his blue suit again, the one he had worn to court last week. It was the only nice suit he owned. The elevator doors opened on the second floor. John wheeled himself down the long hallway. The walls were lined with old pictures of judges and important court cases. The carpet was dark blue and worn thin in places. At the end of the hall, a wooden door had a simple sign: Judge Patricia Adams. John paused for a moment, then knocked. "Come in," called a familiar voice from inside. John opened the door and wheeled himself into the judge's chambers. The room was large with tall bookshelves filled with thick law books. A big wooden desk sat near the window. The walls were painted a soft cream color. Unlike the formal courtroom, this space felt more personal, more lived in. Patricia Adams stood up from behind her desk when John entered. She was wearing a dark green dress instead of her black robe. She smiled at him, something he hadn't seen her do in the courtroom. "John, thank you for coming," she said, walking around her desk to greet him. "Please make yourself comfortable." John noticed that there was a space without a chair in front of her desk, perfect for his wheelchair. This wasn't an accident. She had prepared for him. "I hope this isn't too mysterious," Patricia said as she returned to her seat. "I wanted to talk to you about an idea I've been thinking about since our last meeting." "I'm curious," John admitted. "It's not every day a judge asks you to come back to court when you're not in trouble." Patricia smiled again. "True." She opened a drawer in her desk and pulled out a framed photograph. She looked at it for a moment, then handed it to John. The photo showed a young Marine in his dress blues. He stood tall and proud, his cover tucked under his arm. He had the same gray-blue eyes as Patricia. This had to be Kevin, her son who died in Iraq. "He was handsome," John said, carefully holding the frame. "A true Marine. You can see it in how he stands." Patricia nodded, her eyes a little misty. "Yes, Kevin loved being a Marine. He was so proud the day he graduated from boot camp." Paused, collecting herself. "After he died, I promised myself I would find a way to honor his memory. That's partly why I became a judge. I wanted to serve in my own way." John handed the photo back to her. She placed it gently on her desk, angled, so they could both see it. "Since our conversation last week, I haven't been able to stop thinking about something," Patricia continued. "How many veterans come through our court system without anyone understanding their unique challenges?" John thought about this. "Probably a lot. When I first came home, it was hard to adjust. Some of my buddies had it even worse. A few got into trouble with the law. Minor things mostly, fights, drinking too much, traffic violations like mine." Patricia nodded. "Exactly. Our court sees many veterans, but we don't have any special programs to help them. No one with direct military experience to advise the court on the challenges veterans face." Now John was beginning to understand why she had asked him here. "You want to start some kind of veterans program for the courts?" "Yes," Patricia said, her eyes lighting up. "The Kevin Adams Veteran Support Program. A way to pair veterans who find themselves in our court system with mentors who understand what they've been through. People who can help them navigate not just the legal issues, but also connect them with VA benefits, mental health services, job training, whatever they need." John leaned forward in his wheelchair. "That sounds great, but what does it have to do with me?" Patricia smiled. "I want you to help me create it. And then, if you're willing, I'd like you to be one of our first veteran mentors." John was surprised. "Me? I don't know anything about the law." "You don't need to," Patricia assured him. "We have plenty of lawyers. What we need are veterans who understand what it's like to serve, what it's like to come home, what it's like to face challenges. People who can talk to other veterans with real understanding." John thought about it. Since his injury, he had struggled to find purpose. He had a small military pension and did some part-time work from home, but nothing that felt truly meaningful. "I'd want to help," he said slowly. "But I'm not sure I'm qualified. I have bad days too. Days when the pain is too much. Days when the memories are too heavy." Patricia's eyes showed understanding. "That's exactly why you would be perfect. You know what it's like to struggle. You know what it's like to keep going anyway." John looked at Kevin's photo again. A young Man who never got the chance to come home to struggle, to rebuild his life. John had been given that chance even with his injuries. Tell me more about how this would work, John said. For the next hour, Patricia explained her vision. The program would identify veterans when they first entered the court system. They would be offered the option to join the program, which would connect them with a mentor like John. The mentor would attend court hearings with them, help them understand their options, and connect them with resources. The courts can be intimidating, Patricia explained. Having someone by your side who understands both the military and the civilian world can make a huge difference. As she talked, John found himself getting excited about the idea. He thought about how lost he had felt when he first came home from Afghanistan. How confusing all the paperwork and appointments had been. How lonely it was to suddenly be without his unit. What about funding? John asked. Programs like this cost money. Patricia smiled. I've already spoken with the county commissioners. They've agreed to provide initial funding, and there are federal grants we can apply for. The VA might help too. John was impressed. You've put a lot of thought into this in just 1 week. Patricia's face became serious. Actually, I've been thinking about something like this for years, but I never took action. I was too caught up in running my courtroom, following procedures, maintaining the dignity of the court. She sighed. When I asked you to stand, when I made that terrible mistake, it was like I finally saw clearly what I'd been missing. The human element, the fact that behind every case is a real person with real struggles. John understood. Sometimes it took a mistake, even a painful one, to see things differently. So, Patricia said, leaning forward, will you help me? Will you be part of the Kevin Adams Veteran Support Program? John thought about all the veterans who might benefit from this program. Men and women like him who had served their country and now needed a little help finding their way home in a different sense. Yes, he said firmly. I'll help. Patricia's face broke into a wide smile. It transformed her completely from the stern judge he had first met. Thank you, John. This means more than I can say. She extended her hand across the desk. John took it. His strong, calloused hand shook her smaller one. It felt like the beginning of something important. There's one more thing, Patricia said, reaching into her desk drawer again. She pulled out an official-looking document. This is the order, dismissing all charges against you from last week. I wanted to give it to you personally. John took the paper, feeling a strange mix of emotions. The case that had brought him to court in humiliation was now leading to something positive and meaningful. When do we start? He asked. Right away, Patricia said. In fact, I've already identified our first potential participant, a young Marine who got into a fight at a bar last weekend. His case is scheduled for Monday morning. Would you be willing to come to court and meet him? John nodded. I'll be there. As John left Patricia's chambers and wheeled himself back down the hallway, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. Direction. A new mission. Not one that required him to carry a weapon or wear a uniform, but one that would let him serve again in a different way. The elevator doors opened and John wheeled himself inside. As the doors closed, he caught his reflection in the polished metal. He was smiling. 6 months had passed since that day in Judge Patricia Adams's chambers. The Kevin Adams Veteran Support Program was now a real thing, with an office on the first floor of the courthouse. The small room had once been a storage closet, but now it had a desk, 2 chairs, and a space for John's wheelchair. The walls were painted a soft blue color. Photos of smiling veterans who had gone through the program were pinned to a corkboard. This Monday morning, John arrived early as usual. He unlocked the office door and wheeled himself inside. He had a busy day ahead. 3 veterans were scheduled for court appearances, and John would be there with each of them. But first, he had paperwork to finish. As John turned on his computer, he heard a knock at the door. He looked up to see Patricia standing there. She was already in her black judge's robe, ready for a day in court. "Good morning, John," she said, with a smile. "Do you have a minute?" Of course, John replied, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. Coffee? Patricia nodded and sat down. John poured her a cup from the coffee pot he had started earlier. He had learned how she liked it. A little cream, no sugar. Big day today, Patricia said, taking the cup. The county commissioners are coming to observe the program. John nodded. I know. I ironed my shirt twice. They both laughed. Over the past 6 months, they had become friends as well as colleagues. They had worked hard together to build the program from nothing. Now it was helping dozens of veterans, with more joining every week. Are you nervous? Patricia asked. John thought about it. A little. But I know the program works. The numbers prove it. He was right. The statistics were impressive. Veterans who participated in the program were much less likely to get in trouble with the law again. Many had found jobs, gotten help for health problems, or reconnected with their families. The program was changing lives. I got a call from Steve Rogers this morning, John said. Patricia smiled. Our first success story. Steve had been that young Marine with the bar fight, the first veteran to go through their program. Now he was working as a mechanic and volunteering at the VA hospital on weekends. He wanted me to tell you thank you. Again, John said. He just signed the lease on his first apartment. Patricia's eyes brightened with pride. That's wonderful news. They sipped their coffee in comfortable silence for a moment. Through the window they could see the courthouse lawn, where leaves were beginning to change color. Fall was coming. I still think about that day, Patricia said quietly. When I asked you to stand. John nodded. He thought about it too sometimes. It was a mistake that led to something good. Still, Patricia said, I wish I hadn't put you through that. John shrugged. Life is funny that way. Sometimes the worst moments lead to the best changes. He gestured around the small office. Without that day, none of this would exist. Before Patricia could respond, there was another knock at the door. A young woman in a Navy uniform stood there. She looked nervous. Petty Officer Lisa Martinez? John asked. The woman nodded. Yes, sir. I have a court appearance at 10. The VA counselor told me to come see you first. Patricia stood up. I'll leave you to it, she said to John. Then to the young sailor, You're in good hands, Petty Officer. As Patricia left, Lisa Martinez took the empty seat. She sat stiffly, her hands clasped in her lap. John recognized that posture, the military bearing, the attempt to look strong when you're scared. Relax, John said gently. This isn't an inspection. I'm John Miller. I'm a Marine veteran, and I'm here to help you understand what's going to happen today. Lisa's shoulders relaxed a little. Thank you, sir. I've never been in trouble before. I don't know what to expect. John smiled. First, you can drop the sir. I work for the court, but I'm not a judge or a lawyer. I'm just a veteran like you. He opened a folder on his desk. I see you're facing charges for a DUI. Lisa looked down at her hands. Yes, it was stupid. I had a bad day, drank too much, thought I was okay to drive. I wasn't. John nodded. He didn't judge her. He had seen too many veterans try to numb their pain with alcohol. The good news is that no one was hurt, and this is your first offense. You're also taking responsibility, which matters a lot. For the next 20 minutes, John explained what would happen in court. He told Lisa what to expect from Judge Adams, what kind of questions she might ask, what the likely outcome would be. The judge will probably order you to complete an alcohol treatment program, John explained. If you do that and stay out of trouble, the charge could be reduced or even dismissed in a year. Lisa looked relieved. I was afraid I'd lose my career in the Navy. That's why this program exists, John said. To make sure one mistake doesn't ruin your life or your service record. As they talked, John noticed the time. We should head to the courtroom. Judge Adams is always exactly on time. Together, they made their way to courtroom 3, the same room where John had first met Judge Adams 6 months ago. Now he entered it several times a week, helping other veterans navigate the system. The courtroom was busier than usual today. The county commissioner sat in the front row, along with reporters from the local newspaper and TV station. John saw Patricia, already at the bench, looking calm and professional. John and Lisa sat in the front row. John noticed her hands shaking slightly. "Deep breath," he whispered. "Remember what we talked about. Be honest, be respectful, and everything will be okay." Lisa nodded and took a deep breath. When her case was called, she stood and walked forward confidently. John wheeled himself up beside her, just as he had done for dozens of other veterans. Judge Adams looked down from the bench, her face serious but kind. "Petty Officer Martinez, I see you're participating in the Veteran Support Program." "Yes, Your Honor," Lisa replied. "And Mr. Miller has explained the process to you?" "Yes, Your Honor." Judge Adams nodded, then proceeded with the hearing just as John had prepared Lisa for. When it was over, Lisa had been ordered to complete an alcohol treatment program and perform community service. If she did these things, her case would be reviewed in 6 months with the possibility of reduced charges. As they left the courtroom, Lisa turned to John. "Thank you," she said. "I was so scared, but you made it easier." John smiled. "That's what we're here for." After Lisa left, John had a short break before his next veteran arrived. He wheeled himself outside to get some fresh air. The courthouse. Steps were long and steep, but there was a ramp on the side that John used. He found a quiet spot under a tree and enjoyed the fall sunshine. A few minutes later, Patricia joined him. She had taken off her robe and was just Patricia now, not Judge Adams. "That went well," she said, sitting on a bench near John's wheelchair. "The commissioners seemed impressed." John nodded. "They should be. The program is working." Patricia looked thoughtful. "You know, we've been focused on helping veterans in the court system, but I've been thinking we should expand. Maybe create a preventive program to help veterans before they get in trouble." John smiled. This was typical Patricia, always thinking ahead, always looking for ways to do more. "What did you have in mind?" "Support groups, job assistance, family counseling, things that might keep veterans from ending up in court in the first place." "I like it," John said. "We could call it Phase 2 of the Kevin Adams Initiative." Patricia's eyes lit up at the mention of her son's name. Yes, Kevin would have liked that. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the people come and go from the courthouse. Some looked worried, others relieved. All were people with stories, with struggles, with lives that mattered. "I never thought I'd say this," John said finally, "but I'm glad I got that traffic ticket 6 months ago." Patricia laughed. "And I'm glad I made that terrible mistake of asking you to stand. Sometimes our worst moments lead to our best work." Then John's phone buzzed. His next veteran had arrived at the office. "Duty calls," he said, turning his wheelchair toward the ramp. Patricia stood. "Me too. I have a full docket this afternoon." As they headed back into the courthouse, John thought about how much had changed in 6 months. He had come to this building filled with anger and shame. Now he came with purpose and pride. His wheelchair, once a symbol of what he had lost, was now just part of who he was as he helped others find their way. The automatic doors of the courthouse opened. Patricia held them for John as he wheeled himself inside. Together, they went back to work, a judge and a veteran, 2 people who had learned that sometimes the most powerful thing in a courtroom isn't the law, it's understanding, compassion, and the chance to stand up for others, even when you can't stand yourself.